present to Sayaka.
All right, so hi, I'm Sayaka. So first I have a quick question. How many people have stayed through all the credits of an animated movie? Wow, that is a lot more than I thought. Okay, we're all good people, but a majority of the people who watch animated movies, or any movies in general, don't watch the credits all the way through. And now you guys are all, if you didn't raise your hand, one of those people, because I just played an entire set of credits for you, which took up like 2 minutes. And it's really important that people watch these credits because there are so many people who work on these movies. Like, it takes up their lifetime. They pretty much dedicated their life to giving you entertainment for just 2 hours, less than 2 hours that you spend sitting in a theater. So this is just a very important part that people kind of glance over. So yeah, pretty much. So what do you think of when you think of animation? Let's get some suggestions. Cartoons? Anything else? Mickey Mouse, right, okay. And so people usually think of Mickey Mouse. I mean, sometimes it takes a minute, but people usually think of Mickey Mouse because of Walt Disney. That was Walt Disney's first character that he pretty much animated. And it's so incredible how complex the development process, or the animation process is, and how it's changed. Mickey Mouse started as just a single character, and then ended up being sort of like a flip book animation. And from there, Walt Disney ended up creating this multi-plane camera, which was really cool because what they would do is they would draw out and paint panoramas, and then they would film and move the different layered panoramas to make it look as if the scenery was actually 3D and actually moving. So the background would be the slowest moving, whereas the whatever was closest would be the fastest moving. So it just kind of makes sense. When you're looking out a window of a car as it's going by, everything that's right there, all the scenery that's right there is moving really fast, right? And then you would look off into the distance, example for Colorado, the mountains, and they aren't moving at all, or they're just moving very slowly. So it's really cool that Walt Disney was able to come up with this idea, because it's pretty much the first progression into 3D animation. So to begin with an animated movie, you start in development. Now, development is probably the most important part of an animated process because it's coming up with an entire, the entire story before it's even made. There's pretty much 3 different ways you can figure out how you want to make an animated movie. There is the script writing. So if an outside writer has written a script and they turn it into the company and they're like, hey, this is a movie that I'm interested in making, the company can be like, yes, this is what we want to make, or no, this isn't what we want to make. And that's what a lot of movies usually go through, especially ones that aren't franchised. So Marvel obviously is dedicated to Marvel superheroes, but stuff such as DreamWorks sometimes takes in live action, which you probably didn't know as much because DreamWorks doesn't usually do as many live action movies, but they do, so you should check that out. We also have a book. So a good example, How to Train Your Dragon, was originally a book, and they decided, you know what, this is a really cool story preface, so we're gonna make this book into a movie. And so that all goes in development. They're like, okay, do we want to make it along the same lines as the book, or do we want to completely change it, or what? So they decide that. Or they can do a completely original idea, such as Kung Fu Panda. So Kung Fu Panda was in the development process for about 5 years. It started out as a really dark tone. Well, how many people have seen Kung Fu Panda? Okay, good. so you'll know. So it started out as like a really sort of darker toned. Poe was really a serious character. It was like a really sort of, like, it wasn't as comedic as it was now. And I got to read the sort of progression, which was really cool because it was cool to see how the producers and the directors were like, okay, we're going to take it from this really dark-toned movie to kind of add more of a comedic side because we don't want the story to be as dark. And so they added like a little bit more comedy, and then they tested it out and added a little bit more comedy until they finally came across this whole like, okay, we're going to have this really goofy panda who just doesn't fit in anywhere, and he just can't get anything right, and he's just really clumsy, right? And that's ended up happening over a span of like 5 years, and that's before it even goes through any animation process. So this is just them coming up with the idea of the movie. But then it goes through the pipeline. So the pipeline, it starts at story and editorial. So story and editorial is like where you see the first visual part of the movie. So the story, they write the script, they give like a chunk of the script to storyboard artists who take that chunk and sort of pan it out. So I'm standing here, and then I like make this sort of gesture. Editorial takes that scene and this scene and times it. So if they want me to just be standing like this for like a second, they'll do that. And then if they want me to gesture for like 5 seconds, they'll make sure that is longer and this is shorter, so that they know when it goes to modeling and crowds and all of the other departments, they know how long to keep on each like position. So then it goes to art and visual development. So art and visual development is sort of they pretty much draw out everything that's in the scene. So they draw out the chair, like here's an example. So if this was the scene that we were filming, they would draw out all the chairs, and they would draw out all the main characters, and they would draw out everything that you would see in the scene. But they wouldn't model it, they would just draw it out. And then they would give it to the modeling, who brings it into 3D, like a 3D visual world. So it's really cool because the actual process is just so complex, and there are like 12 people working on each of these departments, and there are like sub-departments. So there ends up being like 100 people just in the actual like campus working on this movie. And then there's like the people who are overseas doing franchising and animation, and then there are people who are just like in different places doing all this different work. There'll be artists that are hired from off the campus, and there's just so many people that goes into it. So you can see like there's like lighting, and here's the characters, and then of course they have to create all of these dragons, and it's just a very complex process, which I really can't even start to explain because I just don't have the time. So then, why should you stay for the credits? Well, kind of just what I just explained. I mean, there's 12 people working in each department. It keeps going back and forth. It can take up to like 3 years. These are like more than 100 people dedicating 3 years up to 9 years of their life. For Shrek, it was 9 years in development until it was finally put into animation. Like that's before it was even put into animation. So there are people who are just dedicating their lives to make you entertained for less than 2 hours. And it just seems to make sense that you should stay for those extra 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever there is to see and give those people who are working on all these movies the credit that they deserve, right? All right. So, questions? Yes, because so with live action, you can just get people who are alive and record them. With animation, they have to make everything from scratch. There's nothing that's pre-made. They have to make everything from scratch. They have to make characters, settings. They can't even make like everything. Like they have to create like this little island that it's like a 3D island that's on the computer that they just move the characters around, and they can't make anything outside of that island because it just costs too much. Like there's so much that has to be done in such a short amount of time. And if the movie ends up taking longer to produce, they're just like, it's not even worth it. It's not even worth it to keep going because we spent way too much money just making all of these different pieces. Like if they add a new character, then they have to reanimate the character into every one of the scenes that it's in. And if they change a scene, they have to go back and redo every single step for that scene. They can't just like move it around again because, like, what if you add something that's really important, vital to that scene? They have to literally reanimate the entire scene and refilm the entire scene. Yes.
What about the process where the people's voices are laid over to the characters?
So voiceover is done at like the beginning of, I wonder if I can go back to the pipeline. Okay. So voiceover is done like right at the beginning, like right here, before a lot of it goes to 3D animations. And that's because the 3D animators usually use the recordings of the voiceover artists to like match their mouth movements and stuff. A good example of that is Emma Stone. If any of you have seen Croods, she has very distinct mouth movements, and if you can notice it in the Croods movie because they made all of the little movements that she does with her mouth, which is really cool. Anything else?
How many different scenes are in one movie?
Wow, it really depends on the movie because, well, are you talking like final or like during production? Because during production, like thousands of scenes are going by because they're just redoing and making and redoing, and the scene is constantly being like made better and edited by a different department. So a lot of scenes are being made. In the final, anytime you see a sort of scenery change is usually when the scene is changing, because then that means they're taking the filming from one sort of virtual island to another virtual island, so they're completely changing like the setting and everything. But yeah, usually whenever you see like a big setting change is when there's a different scene. Yes?
What production role most interests you?
I like the story, really, because I think I'm probably biased because I spend a lot of time reading scripts. But I really like the story because it's not really like the most creative, but you really you have a lot of like room to decide to kind of make these characters whatever you want. So with the example of Kung Fu Panda, they completely changed the entire story. And so development is really cool because they do that in development, but story people are also working on that with development because they're actually writing the script. So it's really cool because the story people really have a lot of room to like create the settings and create the characters, and they really put like they do a lot of like imagery. So the artists they don't really know what they're like looking at until they read what the story people have written. So I think probably story, because it's just fascinating. And there's so much that goes into it. I just right at this moment, I think story is probably the one that interests me the most.
All right.